Friction. Friction is a force which opposes the relative motion of the bodies which are in contact. This happens whenever such a motion exists, that is, when the objects move relative to each other or whenever other forces tend to produce such a motion. Causes of friction. Let's suppose we have a wooden block on a table. We are tempted to say that both the bottom of the block and the table surface are very smooth because this is what we can see with our own eyes. But at a microscopic level, things look a lot different. These microscopic irregularities, called asperities, are the only points of contact between the heavy wooden block and the table surface. Because these irregularities are subject to large stresses or forces, they tend to weld together. In order to make the wooden block slide on the surface of the table, we have to apply a force on the block. The wooden block will move only if the applied force is greater than the force created by the interacting asperities, which tend to make the two objects stick together. Static friction. Let's consider two solid surfaces in contact and at rest relative to each other. Each surface exerts a force of friction on the other and prevents them from sliding. We have to apply an external force on the wooden block in order to make it slide on the surface of the table. Let's assume that we start by applying a small force to the wooden block and then we gradually increase the value of this force. When the force reaches a certain limit, the wooden block starts to move. This limit value of the external force applied to the wooden block is equal to the force of static friction. Kinetic friction. After the wooden block starts to move on the surface of the table, the force with which we have to push it in order to prevent it from stopping is called the kinetic friction. The kinetic friction is also generated by the irregularities of the two surfaces in contact, but it is smaller than the force of static friction. Our experience tells us that it is harder to make an object which is at rest move than it is to keep it moving afterwards. This tells us that the force of kinetic friction is smaller than the force of static friction. Rolling friction. From our everyday life, we know that it is easier to move an object which has wheels as opposed to the same object without wheels. It is easier to push a car whose wheels rotate than the same car. The laws of friction. As we said, friction is the force opposing the motion of one body sliding or rolling over a second one. The most important aspects of friction are: 1. The direction of the force of friction is opposite to the direction of motion. 2. The force of friction is independent of the area of contact between the two objects. There is the same force of friction in these two scenarios. Three, the magnitude of the force of friction is proportional to the normal force between the two surfaces in contact. 4. The magnitude of the force of friction depends on the materials of the two objects in contact.